Hello. Before we begin, a quick note. The Bore You to Sleep podcast relies on you and sponsors, which means you will hear a quick advertisement before the beginning of tonight's episode. While the podcast is free, you are welcome to subscribe for just $2.99 per month, which supports the creation of this podcast and gives you an ad-free listening experience. Simply click the link in the show notes from your podcast app. Rest easy. Hello. Welcome to the Bore You to Sleep podcast. The podcast that will hopefully help you get to sleep. I am going to read an open source book, one that is not particularly interesting, but one that is hopefully boring enough to get you to sleep. Tonight's reading comes from The English Works of Thomas Hobbes, Volume 3. Written largely during the 1600s, this story covers the works of English philosopher Thomas Hobbes. My name is Teddy, and I aim to help people everywhere get a good night's rest. Sleep is so important, and my mission is to help you get the rest that you need. The podcast is designed to play in the background while you slowly fall asleep. For those of you who are new to the podcast, this podcast started from my own struggles with sleep. I wanted to create a resource for others facing similar challenges, and I'm so grateful for the amazing community we've built together. This podcast is self-made and self-produced, which is why you will hear a short ad at the beginning of each episode. These ads, along with the support from subscribers and patrons, enable me to keep delivering this podcast for free to those who need it. Thank you to everyone who shared their words of gratitude with me during the week, whether through the website or your podcast app. Your messages mean the world to me. A special thanks to the new subscribers via Spotify for podcasters, and of course, all the existing subscribers and Patreon sponsors. I would also like to thank listeners who reached out via the website. Your lovely messages and feedback are so appreciated. My goal is to keep this podcast free and accessible to everyone, which, as I mentioned, is why you'll hear a quick ad from Spotify at the beginning of each episode. It helps generate financial support for the creation of each episode. If you find the podcast beneficial and would like to support it, there are a few ways you can contribute. Follow the podcast in your podcast app, and if you have time, please leave a comment. Even one sentence really helps out. You can always become a subscriber for $2.99 per month by clicking on the link in the show notes. This also removes the Spotify ads and supports episode creation. If subscribing is not possible, an easy way is simply by leaving a review and rating in your podcast app. If you would like, you can always say hello to me at boretosleep.com. Hearing from you is one of the best things about producing this podcast. Of course, helping you get that good night's sleep is why I continue to do so. Sharing the podcast with a friend who may need it is also a fantastic way to show your appreciation while helping others. In the meantime, lie back, relax, and enjoy the readings. The English Works of Thomas Hobbes of Malmesbury by Sir William Molesworth, Bart. Volume 3. To my most honoured friend, Mr. Francis Godolphin of Godolphin. Honoured Sir, your most worthy brother, Mr. Sidney Godolphin, when he lived, was pleased to think my study something, and otherwise to oblige me, as you know, with real testimonies of his good opinion, great in themselves, and the greater for the worthiness of his person. For there is not any virtue that disposeth a man, either to the service of God, or to the service of his country, to civil society, or private friendship, that did not manifestly appear in his conversation, not as acquired by necessity, or affected upon occasion, but inherent and shining in a generous constitution of his nature. Therefore, in honour and gratitude to him, and with devotion to yourself, I humbly dedicate unto you this my discourse of commonwealth. I know not how the world will receive it, nor how it may reflect on those that shall seem to favour it. For in a way beset with those that contend on one side for too great liberty, and on the other side for too much authority, 'tis hard to pass between the points of both unwounded. But yet, methinks, the endeavour to advance the civil power should not be by the civil power condemned, nor private men, by reprehending it, declare they think that power too great. Besides, I speak not of the men, but in the abstract of the seat of power, like to those simple and impartial creatures in the Roman Capitol, that with their noise defended those within it, not because they were they, but there, offending none, I think, but those without, or such within, if there be any such as favour them. That which perhaps may most offend are certain texts of Holy Scripture, alleged by me to other purpose than ordinarily they used to be by others. But I have done it with due submission, and also in order to my subject necessarily, for they are the outworks of the enemy, from whence they impugn the civil power. If notwithstanding this, you find my labour generally decried, you may be pleased to excuse yourself and say, I am a man that love my own opinions, and think all true I say, that I honoured your brother, and honour you, and have presumed on that to assume the title, without your knowledge of being, as I am, Sir, your most humble and a most obedient servant, Thomas Hobbes. The Introduction. Nature, the art whereby God hath made and governs the world, is by the art of man, as in many other things, so in this also imitated, that it can make an artificial animal. For seeing life is but a motion of limbs, the beginning whereof is in some principal part within. Why may we not say that all automata, engines that move themselves by springs and wheels as doth a watch, have an artificial life? For what is the heart but a spring, and the nerves but so many strings, and the joints but so many wheels, giving motion to the whole body, such as was intended by the artificer? Art goes yet further, imitating the rational and most excellent work of nature, man. For by art is created that great Leviathan called a commonwealth or state, and in which the sovereignty is an artificial soul, as giving life and motion to the whole body. The magistrates and other officers are judicature and execution, artificial joints, reward and punishment, by which fastened to the seat of the sovereignty every joint and member is moved to perform his duty, are the nerves that do the same in the body natural. The wealth and riches of all the particular members are the strength, salus populi, the people's safety, its business, counselors, by whom all things needful for it to know are suggested unto it, are the memory, equity, and laws, and artificial reason and will, concord, health, sedition, sickness, and civil war and death. Lastly, the pacts and covenants by which the parts of his body politic were at first made, set together and united, resemble that fiat, or let us make man, pronounced by God in the creation. To describe the nature of this artificial man, I will consider, first the matter thereof, and the artificer, both which is man. Secondly, how and by what covenants it is made, what are the rights and just power or authority of a sovereign, and what is it that preserve or dissolveth it? Thirdly, what is a Christian commonwealth? Lastly, what is the kingdom of darkness? Concerning the first, there is a saying much usurped of late, that wisdom is acquired, not by reading of books, but of men. Consequently, whereunto those persons that for the most part can give no other proof of being wise, take great delight to show what they think they have read in men, by uncharitable censures of one another behind their backs. But there is another saying, not of late understood, by which they might learn truly to read one another, if they would take the pains, that is, nocete ipsum, read thyself, which was not meant, as it is now used, to countenance either the barbarous state of men in power towards their inferiors, or to encourage men of low degree to a saucy behaviour towards their betters, but to teach us that for the similitude of the thoughts and passions of one man to the thoughts and passions of another, whosoever looketh into himself and considereth what he doth, when he does think, opine, reason, hope, and fear, etc., and upon what grounds, he shall thereby read and know what are the thoughts and passions of all other men upon the like occasions. I say the similitude of passions which are the same in all men, desire, fear, hope, etc., not the similitude of the objects of the passions, which are the things desired, feared, hoped, etc. For these the constitution, individual, and particular education do so vary, and they are so easy to be kept from our knowledge, that the character of man's heart, blotted and confounded as they are with dissembling, lying, counterfeiting, and erroneous doctrines, are legible only to him that searcheth hearts. And though by men's actions we do discover their designs sometimes, yet to do it without comparing them with our own, and distinguishing all circumstances by which the case may come to be altered, is to decipher without a key, and be for the most part deceived by too much trust, or by too much diffidence, as he that reads is himself a good or evil man. But let one man read another by his actions never so perfectly, it serves him only with his acquaintance, which are but few. He that is to govern a whole nation must read in himself, not this or that particular man, but mankind, which though it be hard to do, harder than to learn any language or science, yet when I shall have set down my own reading orderly and perspicuously, the pains left another will be only to consider if he also find not the same in himself, for this kind of doctrine admitteth no other demonstration. Concerning the thoughts of men, I will consider them first singly, and afterwards in train, or dependence upon one another. Singly, they are every one a representation or appearance of some quality, or other accident of a body without us, which is commonly called an object, which object worketh on the eyes, ears, and other parts of a man's body, and by diversity of working produceth diversity of appearances. The original of them is that which we call sense, for there is no conception in a man's mind, which hath not at first, totally or by parts, been begotten upon the organs of sense. The rest are derived from that original. To know the natural cause of sense is not very necessary to the business now in hand, and I have elsewhere written of the same at large. Nevertheless, to fill each part of my present method, I will briefly deliver the same in this place. The cause of sense is the external body or object which presseth the organ proper to each sense, either immediately, as in the taste and touch, or mediately, as in seeing, hearing, and smelling, which pressure, by the mediation of the nerves, and other strings and membranes of the body, continued inwards to the brain and heart, causeth there a resistance or counter pressure, or endeavour of the heart to deliver itself, which endeavour, because outward, seemeth to be some matter without. And this seeming or fancy is that which men call sense, and consisteth, as to the eye, in a light, or colour figured, to the ear, in a sound, to the nostril, in an odour, to the tongue and palate, in a savour, and to the rest of the body in heat, cold, hardness, and softness, and such other qualities as we discern by feeling. All which qualities, called sensible, are in the object that causeth them, but so many several motions of the matter, by which it presseth our organs diversely. Neither in us that are pressed are they anything else, but divers motions, for motion produceth nothing but motion, but their appearance to us is fancy, the same waking, that dreaming, and as pressing, rubbing, or striking the eye makes us fancy a light, and pressing the ear produceth a din, and so do the bodies also we see, or hear, produce the same by their strong, though unobserved action. For if those colours and sounds were in the bodies, or objects that cause them, they could not be served from them as by glasses, and in echoes by reflection we see they are. Where we know the thing we see is in one place, the appearance in another, and though at some certain distance the real and very objects seem invested with the fancy it begets in us, yet still the object is one thing, the image or fancy is another, so that sense in all cases is nothing else but original fancy, caused, as I have said, by the pressure, that is, by the motion of external things upon our eyes, ears, and other organs thereunto ordained. But the philosophy schools, through all the universities of Christendom, grounded upon certain texts of Aristotle, teach another doctrine, and say for the cause of vision, that the thing seen sendeth forth on every side a visible species, in English, a visible show, apparition or aspect, or a being seen, the receiving whereof into the eye is seeing. And for the cause of hearing, that the thing heard sendeth forth an audible species, that is an audible aspect or audible being seen, which entering at the ear maketh hearing. Nay, for the cause of understanding also, they say the thing understood sendeth forth an intelligible species, that is, an intelligible being seen, which coming into the understanding makes us understand. I say not this as disproving the use of universities, but because I am to speak hereafter of their office in a commonwealth. I must let you see on all occasions, by the way, what things would be amended in them, amongst which the frequency of insignificant speech is one. That when a thing lies still, unless somewhat else stir it, it will lie still forever, is a truth that no man doubts of. But that when a thing is in motion, it will eternally be in motion, unless somewhat else stay it, though the reason be the same, namely that nothing can change itself, is not so easily assented to. For men measure not only other men, but all other things, by themselves, and because they find themselves subject after motion to pain and lassitude, think every thing else grows weary of motion, and seeks repose of its own accord, little considering whether it be not some other motion, wherein that desire of rest they find in themselves consisteth. From hence it is that the schools say, heavy bodies fall downwards out of an appetite to rest and to conserve their nature, in that place which is most proper for them, ascribing appetite and knowledge of what is good for their conservation, which is more than man has to things inanimate, absurdly. When a body is once in motion, it moveth, unless something else hinder it eternally, and whatsoever hindereth it cannot in an instant, but in time, and by degrees quite extinguish it. And as we see in the water, though the wind cease, the waves give not over rolling for a long time after, so also it happeneth in that motion, which is made in the internal parts of a man, then when he sees, dreams, etc. For after the object is removed, or the eye shut, we still retain an image of the thing seen, though more obscure than when we see it. And this is it the Latins call imagination, from the image made in seeing, and apply the same, though improperly, to all the other senses. But the Greeks call it fancy, which signifies appearance, and is as proper to one sense as to another. Imagination therefore is nothing but decaying sense, and is found in men and many other living creatures, as well as sleeping as waking. The decay of sense in men waking is not the decay of the motion made in sense, but an obscuring of it, in such manner as the light of the sun obscureth the light of the stars, which stars do not less exercise their virtue, by which they are visible in the day than in the night. But because amongst many strokes which our eyes, ears, and other organs receive from external bodies, the predominant only is sensible, therefore the light of the sun being predominant, we are not affected with the action of the stars, and any object being removed from our eyes, though the impression it made in us remain, yet other objects more present succeeding, and working on us, the imagination of the past is obscured and made weak, as the voice of a man is in the noise of the day, from whence it followeth that the longer the time is, after the sight or sense of any object, the weaker is the imagination, for the continual change of man's body destroys in time the parts which in sense were moved, so that distance of time and of place hath one and the same effect in us. For as at a great distance of place, that which we look at appears dim and without distinction of the smaller parts, and as voices grow weak and inarticulate, so also after great distance of time, our imagination of the past is weak, and we lose, for example, of cities we have seen, many particular streets, and of actions, many particular circumstances. This decaying sense, when we would express the thing itself, I mean fancy itself, we call imagination, as I said before, but when we would express the decay and signify that sense is fading, old and past, it is called memory. So that imagination and memory are but one thing, which for divers considerations hath divers names. Much memory, or memory of many things, is called experience. Again, imagination being only of those things which have been formerly perceived by sense, either all at once or by parts at several times. The former, which is the imagining the whole object as it was presented to the sense, is simple imagination, as when one imagineth a man or horse which he hath seen before. The other is compounded, as when from the sight of a man at one time, and of a horse at another, we conceive in our mind a censure. So when a man compoundeth the image of his own person with the image of the actions of another man, as when a man imagines himself a Hercules or an Alexander, which happeneth often to them that are much taken with reading of romances, it is a compound imagination, and properly but a fiction of the mind. There be also other imaginations that rise in men, though waking, from the great impression made in sense, as from gazing upon the sun. The impression leaves an image of the sun before our eyes a long time after, and from the being long and vehemently attent upon geometrical figures, a man shall in the dark, though awake, have the images of lines and angles before his eyes, which kind of fancy hath no particular name, as being a thing that doth not commonly fall into men's discourse. The imaginations of them that sleep are those we call dreams, and these also, as all other imaginations have been before, either totally or by parcels in the sense. And because in sense the brain and nerves, which are the necessary organs of sense, are so benumbed in sleep as not easily to be moved by the action of external objects, there can happen in sleep no imagination, and therefore no dream, but what proceeds from the agitation of the inward parts of man's body, which inward parts, for the connection they have with the brain, and other organs, when they be distempered, to keep the same in motion, whereby the imaginations there formerly made appear as if a man were waking, saving that the organs of sense being now benumbed, so as there is no new object which can master and obscure them with a more vigorous impression, a dream must needs be more clear in the silence of sense than our waking thoughts. And hence it cometh to pass that it is a hard matter, and by many thought impossible, to distinguish exactly between sense and dreaming. For my part, when I consider that in dreams I do not often nor constantly think of the same persons, places, objects and actions that I do waking, nor remember so long a train of coherent thoughts dreaming, as at other times, and because waking I often observe the absurdity of dreams, but never dream of the absurdities of my waking thoughts. I am well satisfied that being awake I know I dream not, though when I dream I think myself awake, and seeing dreams are caused by the distemper of some of the inward parts of the body, divers distembers must needs cause different dreams, and hence it is that lying cold breedeth dreams of fear, and raiseth the thought and image of some fearful object, the motion from the brain to the inner parts, and from the inner parts to the brain being reciprocal, and that as anger causeth heat in some parts of the body when we are awake, so when we sleep the overheating of the same parts causeth anger, and the raiseth up in the brain the imagination of an enemy. In the same manner as natural kindness when we are awake causeth desire, and desire makes heat in certain other parts of the body, so also too much heat in those parts while we sleep raiseth in the brain an imagination of some kindness shown. In some, our dreams are the reverse of our waking imaginations, the motion when we are awake beginning at one end, and when we dream at another. The most difficult discerning of a man's dream from his waking thoughts is then, when by some accident we observe not that we have slept, which is easy to happen to a man full of fearful thoughts, and whose conscience is much troubled, and that sleepeth without the circumstances of going to bed or putting off his clothes, as one that noddeth in a chair. For he that taketh pains and industriously lays himself to sleep, in case any uncouth and exorbitant fancy come unto him, cannot easily think it other than a dream. We read of Marcus Brutus, one that had his life given him by Julius Caesar, and was also his favourite, and notwithstanding murdered him, how at Philippi, the night before he gave battle to Augustus Caesar, he saw a fearful apparition, which is commonly related by historians as a vision. But considering the circumstances, one may easily judge to have been but a short dream. For sitting in his tent, pensive and troubled with the horror of his rash act, it was not hard for him, slumbering in the cold, to dream of that which most affrighted him, which fear as by degrees it made him awake. So also it must needs make the apparition by degrees to vanish, and having no assurance that he slept, he could have no cause to think it a dream, or anything but a vision. And this is no very rare accident, for even they that be perfectly awake, if they be timorous and superstitious, possessed with fearful tales, and alone in the dark, are subject to the like fancies, and believe they see spirits and dead men's ghosts walking in churchyards, whereas it is either their fancy only, or else the knavery of such persons as make use of such superstitious fear, to pass disguised in the night, to places they would not be known to haunt. From this ignorance of how to distinguish dreams and other strong fancies from vision and sense did arise the greatest part of the religion of the Gentiles in time past, that worshipped satyrs, fauns, nymphs, and the like, and nowadays the opinion that rude people have of fairies, ghosts, and goblins, and of the power of witches. For as for witches, I think not that their witchcraft is any real power, but yet that they are justly punished for the false belief that they have that they can do such mischief, joined with their purpose to do it if they can, their trade being nearer to a new religion than to a craft or science. And for fairies and walking ghosts, the opinion of them has, I think, been on purpose either taught or not confuted, to keep in credit the use of exorcism, of crosses, of holy water, and other such inventions of ghostly men. Nevertheless, there is no doubt but God can make unnatural apparitions, but that he does it so often as men need to fear such things, more than they fear the stay or change of the course of nature, which he can also stay and change, is no point of Christian faith. But evil men, under pretext that God can do anything, are so bold as to say anything when it serves their turn, though they think it untrue. It is the part of a wise man to believe them no farther than right reason makes that which they say appear credible. If this superstitious fear of spirits were taken away, and with it prognostics from dreams, false prophecies, and many other things depending thereon, by which crafty ambitious persons abuse the simple people, men would be much more fitted than they are for civil obedience. And this ought to be the work of the schools, but they rather nourish such doctrine, for not knowing what imagination or the senses are, what they receive, they teach. Some saying that imaginations rise of themselves and have no cause, others that they rise most commonly from the will, and that good thoughts are blown, inspired into a man by God, and evil thoughts by the devil, or that good thoughts are poured infused into a man by God, and evil ones by the devil. Some say the senses receive the species of things and deliver them to the common sense, and the common sense delivers them over to the fancy, and the fancy to the memory, and the memory to the judgment, like handing of things from one to another, with many words making nothing understood. And that concludes tonight's reading. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this story, but I also hope that you're feeling a little drowsy. If you're not quite tired yet, please feel free to listen to another episode of the Bore You to Sleep podcast. Until next time, and good night.